right, you're live now.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for being here. This is the first presentation of our Why Should You Run in the Elections, the ASUW Elections presentation series. And this is being hosted by the ASUW Elections Committee. So we're going to start off with a little bit of information about our speakers today. I am Jake St. Marie. I'm a senator for the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. I'm the chair of the ASUW Elections Committee. I'm the current Sergeant at Arms for the Senate, and I'm the former Senate Marshal. In addition, outside of school, big skier, love the outdoors. Now I'll pass it over to John.
So, well, thanks, Jake. Super appreciate it. You asked us to put a picture of us doing something cool, and of course, I don't do anything cool. My only personality trait is loving my home state of California, so naturally, I put that picture up there. But super happy to be here. My current position is the Senate President Pro Tempore. So I kind of serve as like the second in command, right hand to the Vice President, who oversees all of our legislative happenings in the Senate. But I am a senator for the College of Arts and Sciences and the committee chair for our Program and Institutional Development Committee, which kind of facilitates the relationships between our programs and partners of ASUW. Also the former ASUW Vice President, former executive. I was the Director of Governmental and Community Affairs and was also a first-year senator my first year on campus.
And hello, everyone. I am Jason. I'm the current Senate Marshal. So what that means is I read all the legislation, I count the votes, and all that fun stuff. I end up talking a lot during Senate meetings, and I get tired of hearing my own voice, but whatever. I'm currently a senator for the College of Education. Fortunately, I'm the only senator for the College of Education at the moment, but typically there are 3 of us, and we're able to work with the dean of the college as well as some of the student orgs and stuff like that. I currently chair the Student Outreach and Programming Committee. We do a bit, typically we do a lot more on a year where everyone's on campus, but I kind of like to say that we are a fancy version of the Party Planning Committee for ASUW. We try to do events and stuff like that to engage students. I'm also chairing the Student Organization Funding Board this semester. What that is we basically delegate and determine if student orgs, as long as they meet certain requirements, we give out money from our budget so student orgs can put on events throughout the year. Again, that looks a lot more, I don't know, large scale on a year where people are on campus more. But hopefully post-COVID, we'll get back to having some of those big events that student orgs love to put on and we love to help out with. And then formerly, I was the ASUW Vice President for half a year. I was the ASUW President for a year, and then I was also in first-year Senate with John our freshman year on college campus, or on UW's campus as college students, whatever, you know. All right, so this is an org chart. Typically, when you have an organization as large as ASUW, org charts don't ever look super pretty, but I think this is one of the best versions we've had of it. So really what we're going to talk about mainly today is going to be the executive and legislative branches. Overall, we have the 3 main branches like you would see in like the US government, executive, legislative, judicial, but for today's purposes, we'll focus on the exec and legislative. So with the executive branch, kind of in charge of the executive branch is the president, and then you have the vice president with them. The chief of legislative affairs is sort of the right-hand person of the vice president. They help out with, like it says in the title, all the legislative aspects. So they'll help with Senate stuff, writing bills, supporting senators in that sense. Chief of staff is basically the manager of the executive assistants in the executive branch. And then we typically have about 6 executive assistants. So that list right there is pretty current, but it's up to the president and vice president how many executive assistants they want and basically what those executive assistants do. So when John and I were president and vice president, we introduced the wellness and sustainability director because that was one of our platforms we ran on, and we felt like it was important to dedicate an executive position to that. But obviously that position might go away. Other positions might come into its place, things like that. But that's kind of an overview of the executive branch.
Yeah, and looking at the legislative branch, you can see kind of in the middle, the branch between the executive and the legislative is the vice president. So while the vice president is a member of the executive branch and one of those higher positions within the executive branch, they're also at the top of the legislative branch. And they serve as kind of a middle point between the two. And that's because the ASUW vice president serves as the president of the Senate, like I mentioned earlier. So they preside over all ASUW legislative Senate meetings that we have weekly. So the Senate is comprised of 32 senators. All of them are elected. And you can see on the screen, there's a breakdown by college. So every degree granting program at the university is allotted a certain amount of seats, kind of based on how many students they have within their program. And so you can see the allotment there. And one of the more important parts of the policy aspect of what we do as senators is in our standing committees. And so you can see a list of those at the bottom as well. And each of those standing committees has a dedicated purpose, and they meet weekly to come up with new legislation, form policy, and fulfill their own roles as outlined by some of our working documents. And you can also see on the right-hand side, we have special committees that senators are able to serve on. And then we also partner with some different programs and groups that we fund on campus that serve as what we call ex officios. And so they don't necessarily have a vote at Senate, but they're able to come and provide updates on their programs and have a seat at the table, which is really important.
So obviously like Pres VP, they're kind of the top of the organizational chart, food chain, whatever you want to call it here in ASUW. But really the President VP kind of set the tone for what that administration will work on. So they come up with platforms that they want to kind of work towards. So for example, John and I, when we were in office, we focused on like education transparency aspects, diversity, equity, inclusion, and then sustainability. So what we did is sort of like use those policies and platforms to shape what we would do for the year. When it comes to what the President VP can do, it's pretty broad, I would say. Obviously, there are specific rules that they have to follow through the bylaws, the Constitution, stuff like that. But for the president specifically, they are the only student ex officio on the Board of Trustees. So they don't vote like our ex officios, but they, like John said earlier, kind of have the seat at the table. So the president is basically the student voice when it comes to the Board of Trustees. Obviously, other students can come to those meetings, but when it comes to being at the table and sort of having an influence as well as an opinion on what happens with the board, the ASUW president is that person and kind of has a pretty big voice there too. The president, the vice president will work to hire their executives for the year. The president can write legislation, and they can use this to kind of establish policies for the administration and again, like work towards platform goals. They'll appoint students to the Judicial Council. So they'll appoint the Associate Justices and the Chief Justice. And then the president's sort of the face of ASUW and the student body. So a lot of times they'll ask the president to speak at events, to kind of be the, the student there to sort of not only talk about ASUW, but just the student body in general. And then the ASUW president also works internally with ASUW's budget to help manage and approve certain budgetary action items. They also make formal recommendations on the next fiscal year budget that is managed solely with student fees. And then the president, as well as the vice president, will also work closely with the university admin. So that's the president, all the VPs and the deans and directors as well. They're sort of, like I said, the student voice there. And a lot of times the ASUW president will be in some of those meetings with admin to provide that student perspective. And then John, do you want to talk a little bit about what the VP does?
Yeah, definitely. And Jason and Courtney, of course, both having been vice president, feel free to add anything at the end. I'll just touch on a few of these points. So the vice president, and I mentioned this earlier again, is the person who runs the Senate. So every Tuesday we have our Senate meetings with all of the senators from all those colleges across campus, and they are the ones who preside over those meetings and run through our agenda. And also with that, and I talked about committees, they are the ones who make those committee assignments at the beginning of the year, and they check in with committee chairs, make sure that they're producing legislation and keeping to task with all the things that need to get done in ASUW. But you also have a bit of flexibility as the number two in the vice president role, where you can kind of work on a variety of passion projects. So things that were really important to me was the census, getting an accurate count in Albany County and the city of Laramie. So I got to sit in and kind of merge both the university's census operations and the city of Laramie's operations, and we kind of brought those together with ASUW and have weekly and biweekly meetings to talk about how we were working forward to get an accurate census count in Laramie, to make sure we were getting all the appropriate funds and stuff that comes from accurate census numbers. So it's just little projects like that that you can kind of pick up from different areas of campus, different passion projects that you're passionate about and that you want to see happen across campus. You can kind of pick those up as the administration goes along. You can also write legislation. So being the head of the Senate and the legislative branch, you see a lot of legislation coming through. And we also have a position called the Chief of Legislative Affairs, who kind of serves as like the chief of staff for the vice president, the same way that the president has a chief of staff. And so that person, basically their whole job is to write legislation, to make sure we're facilitating the proper legislative environment, and help senators as well with that legislative process, which can be difficult at times. So we kind of use some of the platforms of the president and vice president who were just elected to kind of push policies that reflect what had just been ran on in the previous election, and those pieces of legislation are important. And you do work hand in hand with the president in achieving those platform goals, but you also want to make sure that you are creating cohesion between all branches of ASUW. I mentioned earlier that the legislative branch and the executive branch are different, and they have different responsibilities and roles. And so as the vice president, you are in the middle of those two groups, and you want to make sure that there is cohesion between the two, and that there is everyone's on the same page to make sure that you all have a common goal, and that we're looking forward to do the work on behalf of the students together.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do as a senator. The first thing is, it's really cool to see how much professional development we get as senators. Even this week, we're actually having a specific professional development workshop for our senators, which is a really cool thing to see. In addition, a lot of these committee meetings and meetings in general, we'll say, are actually really good for professional work experience. At least in my experience, a lot of professional jobs will require you to be in meetings, run meetings, take detailed notes, and just kind of be able to interact in a formal meeting. And ACW gives you a lot of opportunities to do that. In addition, ACW is great about working on our professional writing skills. Like Jason and John both talked about, we end up having to write a lot of legislation for various things we're passionate about, or just bylaw changes. And I know for me personally, it's been a great experience for me to really work on my professional writing. And the next thing we'll talk about is university committees. So the university has committees that are structured by the president, and in these committees, they do various different things, whether it be athletics planning or academic planning, a lot of planning committees now that I think about it. But these are actually one of at least my favorite things about being a senator. It is a really cool experience to be sitting in a room with people as high up as the athletic director, the vice president for student affairs, the provost, and having them ask for your opinion on issues that are facing all students and not just the ones that they're concerned about. And for me, that's been a really great opportunity for me to think on my feet and really be able to advocate for my constituents. The next thing that's pretty awesome is we have weekly, monthly, or bi-monthly meetings with our deans within our colleges. Usually those are organized by the college contact, who's kind of the point of contact for the senators in that college. I know that specifically our College of Business senators have been doing a lot of work with their dean to make some pretty cool changes. And like I've talked about a little bit, we get to interact directly with campus leadership. At our Senate meeting, I believe 2 weeks ago, we actually had President Seidel come, and we were able to ask him some really interesting and at times very difficult questions for him about issues facing our campus. And that was really cool to see all of the senators get to ask President Seidel questions and really push the administration to consider student issues. And the last thing, like we've talked about a lot, writing legislation is a huge piece of what we do. A lot of these end up actually going past just ASUW and first year Senate, and they can go on to the Board of Trustees, upper level administration, and legislation can range from anything as our budget legislation for what we are using student fees for, to statements of support for new degree programs, to statements of support for other just brand new things around campus. And it's a really amazing opportunity. So now I'm just going to open it up to anyone else who's in the meeting if they want to add anything about being a senator. Okay, cool. So now I'll pass it off to Jason to talk about the ACW committees.
Thanks, Jake. So yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are multiple committees within ASUW, but these listed here sort of the the big ones, the main ones that people meet on regularly and that you're assigned to at the beginning of the fall semester by the ASUW Vice President. So first we have the Advocacy, Diversity, and Policy Committee. Sort of their purpose is sort of in the name anyway. They really focus on advocating for underrepresented constituency groups on campus. Their focus is on diversity, equity, inclusion aspects, and then obviously like policy changes that come through ASUW will go to them, but they can also, use their platforms of working for, making the voice of underrepresented students louder. They can write policy that informs that opinion as well. So they're a really busy committee. Typically, if it's not ASUW policy they're working on, then they'll work on other policies outside of ASUW to help underrepresented students on campus. Budget and planning, that's sort of the big fiscal committee that we have, as all government entities and areas that manage budgets do. We have a committee that kind of works on that solely. So budget and planning, known as B&P around here. Like we talked about, their big purpose is working on our budget, planning sort of how we're going to use our student fee dollars, as well as planning for the future and how future student fee dollars will be used. So if there's ever changes in our budget, if there needs to be money moved from one area to another, budget and planning sort of has a say on where that goes and if that gets approved, as well as with the current fiscal year budget, they manage that. And then budget and planning is also the committee that develops the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So with, a lot of budget issues going on, not only at the university, but around the state and the nation, B&P was really busy this year. We had to sort of work around our current budget structure and how we're face the deficit, as well as planning for next year, understanding that we'll probably have lower student enrollment and therefore lower student fees that we'll bring in as well. So that's a really important committee, just making sure that we are being good fiduciaries of student fees and making sure they're being spent appropriately. Programs and institutional development, John talked about this a little bit earlier, but they sort of work with our programs, partners, and services of ASUW. So this will be First Year Senate, Aztec, Non-Traditional Student Council, as well as our strategic partners, which would be the Interfraternity Council, College Pandemic Council, the Sustainability Coalition, and a few other services that ASUW provides as well. Really, PID's purpose is to sort of work with them, make sure they feel supported, as well as see how those programs could possibly be developed further or repurposed if needed. And then they also focus on institutional development aspects. So a lot of times when there's academic changes like course changes, grading scale changes, things like that, PID will have some influence on legislation that ASUW might write, or they'll sort of be at the forefront of that. Like I talked about earlier, funding board, they sort of are the mechanism to which student orgs come to see if they can get money for student org events they want to put on. They can also apply for conference or competition monies. So if your student org is wanting to go to a conference, you can come to the student org funding board, ask for that, and we can help you fund to go to that conference as well. ASUW is fully student fee funded, and we want to do our best to give student fees back. So this is one of the biggest ways we do that. We have over $100,000 typically allocated to the student organization funding board that they give out throughout the year for student orgs to put on events, go to conferences, competitions, and stuff like that. Steering, they're sort of the main policy committee of ASUW. So they're comprised of the vice president, the officers of the Senate, which would be the marshal, the pro temp, the parliamentarian, and the sergeant at arms, as well as a couple other senators. Anytime new legislation is written, steering, kind of in the name, they steer that legislation to the appropriate committee. So if there's a bill that's written about the budget or money changes, it would go to B&P. But if there's a resolution to say that we want to change all grading to pass fail or something like that, it would probably go to PID. They also set up the rules for senators that they have to follow throughout the year, like service hours requirements, as well as attendance and stuff like that. So not necessarily the punitive committee, but they do sort of enforce that structure that senators need to follow. Student outreach programming, talked about that one as well. They're, like I said, kind of the party planning committee. SOP really is helpful for, if there's big initiatives that the ASUW president, vice president want to undertake. So if they want to put out a big survey to see how students feel about a certain issue, they usually use that committee to help advertise it, promote it, and get really good student feedback. And then finally, we have the Intersession Oversight Committee. They work when the Senate is not in session, which is typically during the winter break as well as summer break. And they sort of are there to make sure that there's any necessary actions that need to be taken, that can still be done even when the Senate isn't in session. And then there's one other committee that's on here, not on here, that is fairly important, is the Tuition Allocation Student Fee Review Committee of ASUW. Long name, but basically that committee helps make informed decisions on where tuition's allocated, how much tuition might raise, as well as student fees. So as we know, our student fees go up, they might go down too, but typically ASUW has a really important voice on if that student fee is approved to go higher. And if it does go higher, typically ASUW has a really strong understanding of why that fee is going up. It's also important for us, as we do administer a student fee, to have that committee to not only check other student fees, but our own as well.
Okay, so now I'm gonna talk a little bit about our elections dates. This might seem a little bit intimidating, but we are already all the way to March 10th at this point. So after this presentation series we're putting on, the next big date is the applications, which are due by 8 a.m. on March 12th. This is gonna be, if you're considering running that is the biggest deadline. But then after that, we're gonna have some other dates like the elections ballot, some candidate meet and greets, our Pres VP debate, and then some other important dates. But a big one for everyone is that the ASUW elections will be held April 12th through 14th. So even if you do not run in the election, that is a very important date because you are still going to be eligible to vote in the election as long as you are a student at the university. Next thing we're going to briefly talk about is our elections applications and other important documents. So at this point, the applications are still open. We've got the links to the president, vice president application and the Senate application. They're fairly straightforward, fairly simple, just ask you a few questions about who you are, and both of them incorporate a statement about either your ticket and what you plan on doing if elected, or a small statement if you're going to be a Senate candidate and what you plan on doing if you're elected. If you do plan on running in the elections, I would strongly recommend you read the ASUW, the 2021 elections code. It just outlines all the rules, everything that pertains to the elections in a lot more detail than this. And for anyone, the ASUW elections website is a great place to find any information about our elections, whether it be when voting goes live or still with the applications or any of these recorded sessions that we're doing. You can find all of them through that. So thank you for your time. Does anyone have any questions, or our lovely panel members who are still here? If you have anything you want to add, feel free to. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for your time.